Good morning and welcome to episode 3 of our Tuesday webinar series. Massive thanks to KPMG for this fantastic collaboration as always. So I think we all know the coronavirus pandemic has wreaked economic havoc globally, and the impact on business and business sustainability has been quite substantial. We continue hearing of organizations taking severe action in terms of managing their cost bases. Some concerning recent examples include Edcon, who recently announced that they may need to retrench 22,000 people. State-owned enterprises are doing a similar thing, and it's now estimated that 27% of architects may need to be retrenched in coming months. So it's quite concerning, and cost reduction obviously at top of mind for many companies and many people at the moment. Now, extreme measures like headcount reduction and force majeure have become increasingly common, as we've seen, and don't really bode well for economic recovery or growth going forward. We all know that making tough but commercially sustainable decisions are essential in our business environment, and it's something that we all do on a fairly regular basis. But cost cutting should not impact ultimately the sustainability of the business. And it doesn't take a genius to put two and two together and figure out that if you are letting all your best talent go and you're a knowledge business, that your sustainability may very well be at risk going forward. So cost cutting is not about using a blunt instrument to reduce spend in an organization. It's ultimately about transforming your organization and its operating model to better fit its current and future operating environment. So in today's webinar, Theuns Olivier will be taking us through what it takes to be successful in a cost transformation journey by sharing thoughts on some of the following. What is cost optimization? Why is reassessing your cost structures non-negotiable in our current climate? What are companies doing to manage their costs and margins? What is needed to be successful in these journeys? You can cut costs and ultimately still fail. So it needs to be a measured exercise and a well-informed exercise. What are the pitfalls of these journeys? It's also not a simple matter of cutting costs and just thinking that that sets you up for the future. So there are lots of pitfalls, and hopefully Theuns will talk us through some of that and leave us in a much stronger position following this webinar. Just a quick couple of housekeeping notes as usual. We'd like this to be an interactive session, so please do use the chat and Q&A functionality. Theuns will be using a great new tool today called Menti. I've put the link to that in the chat box, so please do go along there and find the URL for Menti. It would be great if you guys could sort of just open a browser window already, www.menti.com. And the code that you would need there is 846675. We'll share that again. It is in the chat box. So please do go ahead already. It'll be great and make it more interactive when we get to Theuns' presentation. And as usual, this is recorded, available on YouTube, our social media, our website, and so on. So please do go and have a look if you are not able to stay with us for the full session today, or if you'd like to share the material with others. Okay, so moving swiftly along. First up today, we're fortunate to have Mr. Granville Smith joining us out of Johannesburg, and Granville is just going to give us a few words of welcome and introduction on behalf of KPMG. He currently leads the KPMG advisory team in Cape Town and serves as a member of the KPMG advisory executive leadership team. Good morning, Granville. Over to you.
Thank you, Ryan, and good morning, everybody. On behalf of KPMG, I wish to thank Accelerate Cape Town for this opportunity to share our thoughts on a very topical and relevant topic. I guess the current environment, Ryan, as you alluded to, forces all businesses to rethink and revisit their operating model. And it's about finding that right balance between managing your costs and ensuring a sustainable future. On that note, I'm going to leave it to Theuns to take you through the presentation today. And thank you very much again for the opportunity, and look forward to your questions and participations. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Granville. Great having you guys around and great collaborating with KPMG. Very quick introduction to Theuns. So Theuns is an Associate Director in KPMG Management Consulting Division, where he specializes in strategy and business transformation. He's had a stellar 15-year career in consulting and has delivered countless cost optimization projects. Has worked across multiple geographies, including South Africa, numerous countries on the rest of the African continent, the United Kingdom, and the Middle East. Tiens holds an MBA from Manchester Business School, a BCom from UNISA, and a Bachelor of Engineering from the University of Stellenbosch. Good morning, Tiens. Over to you.
Thank you, Ryan, and thank you, Granville, for the words also. Morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. I'm going to talk to you today about something that's I'm very passionate about. Through my career, I've been involved in many cost transformation journeys, shaping cost programs themselves, but also in the delivery side. It is a very challenging transformation journey that organizations do go into. And I do want to share some of my thoughts and ideas as part of that. I'm just going to present my screen and then we can get started. So just maybe to start off, cost transformation and cost optimization is a terminology that's often thrown around quite frequently by people. But cost savings initiatives are not only about stripping out costs out of businesses, as Ryan alluded to. It's a much broader topic. The time that we find ourselves in, there's obviously a clear link with revenue and profit management. There's also the management of balance sheets in terms of liquidity, working capital, and capital expenditure. And of course, common to all of these are of the management of a business's finances and its operations to ensure that a resilient and sustainable business is created in the short and in the long run. And I'm going to give you some of my views today during this presentation in terms of what companies are doing in this regard, what we see in the market of what the type of measures companies are using to save costs and improve profits and margins. What is the pitfalls and challenges in cost optimizations, and then also hopefully leave you with some practical recommendations to consider when your organization embarks on a cost transformation journey. Just in terms of some of the practicalities, we're trying to have this session as interactive as possible. And in this regard, we're going to use the Menti platform. So this is a great online voting tool for presentations. So if I can just ask all participants to please go to www.menti.com. And if you type in that code, you will see that the presentation you see on your screen also is shown on your device. You can either use your laptop second screen or your phone. It's suitable for all types of devices. I'll just give a minute for people to log on. Okay, let's carry on. Okay, just to see if everybody, this is the first question we just want to ask you to respond to. If you look at news articles, and there's often talks about cost management and what people are doing. There's certain, and it's also not a fairly new topic in our environment. There's many organizations that has gone through these type of challenges. And what I would like you to do is just do a bit of a voting in terms of the extent of importance of cost, managing your cost structures into your organization at this moment. And your options, it's a top priority for my organization, cost is no problem. It's revenue that is the challenge. That's also interesting dynamics that you see in the environment, that you can have a lean organization, but because your revenue is dropped off, and that causes obviously severe pressures on your margins. Then we've also got a lot of organizations even before COVID that there was an increased focus on cost management, and that is of course also an indication of our economic conditions. Okay, I'll give another 10 seconds for any final participants. Okay, perfect. I'm going to move on. Interesting that it's, you can see from the responses that we have, and thanks for those that participated. Cost is very topical. It's either a top priority, or even before we had the COVID challenges, there's been a significant focus on cost management in organizations. Okay, just to, as I mentioned, cost optimization it's very topical. If you go to any news article, if you open any newspaper, if you go to websites, there's going to be an article about companies trying to take different measures in terms of saving costs. And there's a couple of reasons also why this is occurring. The pandemic has resulted that a lot of companies has been forced to stop all of their revenue generating activities. Companies had to find alternative ways to do business. Traditional economies of scales, which often used to be a driver of improved profits and uniqueness in certain value propositions, are not relevant anymore. And then we've got an additional challenge now, is where health and safety requirements have also increased the cost to do business, with very little opportunity to pass these costs on to customers. So the net result is that we find ourselves in a situation that traditional business models are not relevant anymore. What will be important, what we feel also very strongly about, is that a company needs to understand what is the drivers of value in their organization. And very importantly, as part of that, this could also be different than the drivers in the past, and what will be required for the future. With understanding the drivers of value, it is important then to map your cost structures against these. And doing this in a structured manner gives the opportunity to challenge the traditional way of doing things. And through that, of course, you can improve revenues, protect your margin, and bring in cash to the organization. Now, what has been quite fascinating to observe, if you go through all the different articles and the different online articles, newspapers, is the difference across sectors, and what different companies do in sectors in terms of responding to the challenges that they're facing. I think the retail sector is a classic example where Edcon, which Ryan also mentioned right in the beginning, they went into this pandemic with already quite a lot of challenges from their business model perspective, and this pandemic has just made it much, much more severe. Now, on the right-hand side of the slide, what you will see, there's a couple of example news titles from this past week. And in this, you can already see just the differences in responses, with certain of these news articles being very negative, like the Sasol and the Cell C one, which is around restructuring and potential job losses, while others is much more positive. And the example that you can see here is around storage, which is considered investing in the UK, even with our rand depreciating. We've all seen all the news around Aspen with a potential vaccine or that can help with critical cases. And that has resulted in an increase in their share price. And then quite good news this past week is that Amazon have announced that they're going to add 3,000 new virtual jobs into the South African environment. But there's also been even movements in mergers and acquisitions. You know, this came a few months ago. At the start of the lockdown, they actually announced that they want to buy Baby City because of the cultural fit to their organization. And then in the past week also, you know, both Kira and TFGs has announced that they're going to embark on a rights offer to enable them to have money available to fund future acquisitions. Now, another theme that you get is that companies do try to position themselves for the future. You know, and to summarize that, you know, overall, you know, I think it's very, very important to take account of your broader ecosystem. That includes your suppliers, your customers, your partners, and of course your employees. You know, and as part of this understanding, you know, you need to have a fast understanding of what is the commercial opportunities and risks within your ecosystem. You know, now is the most prominent, most important time to be very aware of your key suppliers' own challenges. You know, who are their suppliers? What is the risk in their system? You know, what is your own customers, critical customers, and is there any commercial risk and opportunity sitting in this regard? Having a broader understanding of this ecosystem is going to create a lot of new opportunities and indeed identify areas that there could be potentially additional cost creeping into your business. Okay, so just on to the next slide. So globally, KPMG has done some research in terms of what we expect the shift in economies and sectors will be. And we've come up with 8 key themes. Firstly, there is the ways of working. It's going to be changing. You know, all of us have seen the impact of remote working. You know, some of us that are fortunate that can do their work from a remote place. A lot of people mentioned that they're going to continue working like that. There's going to be a significant impact on the labor force. Digital labor is going to be becoming much more prominent. Digital commerce, e-commerce, digital platforms are well documented. There's a huge impact on supply chain and manufacturing. Business continuity and resilience is becoming more important. Environmental and climate change, it's the narrative around that is also going to change slightly. The impact on the COVID pandemic on debt burdens for governments and societies and also companies is also going to be significant. And then lastly, globalization is another key theme. And I think in this regard, globalization is going to be very interesting for us Cape Townians, what that's going to mean in terms of certain localization of certain manufacturing and certain value chains as part of that. Now, if I look at those key themes, there's 5 of them that I really want to highlight from a cost management perspective. You know, our traditional ways of working is going to change. Now, so it's very important to understand what does that mean from my cost management perspective. You know, we're going to have office buildings that's going to stand open. You're going to have an additional cost creeping in from, you know, giving access to technology solutions to your staff. You know, maybe investment even in certain places. I've seen some news articles around how call centers is going to operate in the future, where that will be from people's houses. You know, the labor force, there's going to be that shift to digital. You know, what is automation? What is going to be the impact on my staff numbers? And it, of course, that will also impact on cost basis. Supply chain and manufacturing, also very, very interesting, where, you know, the narrative around supply chain and manufacturing is around being flexible, you know, being able to respond quicker to what your customers' needs are. And that, it's not in previous times where the supply chain was, and manufacturing facilities was around making sure you sweat your assets. Now, building in a level of flexibility is gonna quite likely increase costs. And how do you still do that profitable? And now, and then the last point is around globalization, where bring localization into the mix. What does it mean for your cost of goods? And how do you, and is there an option in terms of passing some of that cost onto the customer, which seldom is the case, but what is the implication to your business margins? Okay, so as part of our research, KPMG's done globally, we've started to map how we believe organizations and sectors is going to respond due to the COVID pandemic. And just to explain what you see in this graph, on your x-axis, it's the pace of the COVID recovery, and that is marked from either slow to being fast. And then on your y-axis, there's the degree of permanent change that we expect in industries, economies, and their value chains. And as you would also realize from different news articles that you read, there's also a lot of opportunities that has come forward to many organizations. And we group them together in what we call the search bucket. And these are around online retailing, and there's been significant opportunities also around for technology type companies, food delivery, pharmaceuticals, the Aspens of the world. Is lots of opportunities for them, and for them, there's going to be a period of significant opportunity that's going to come forward, and so they're in a great position to respond. Then you got some of your interesting companies, which we group as the modified business as usual, where they've been seen as daily essentials. They will feel effect of the consumer shutdown, but they will also be able to recover quickly, and consumer demand quite likely will return to similar volumes as in the past. Sectors locally that's close to Cape Town. Cape Town, of course, is around agriculture and also the consumer goods sector. And then we get, two groupings on the left-hand side, which is, the pace of the COVID recovery is going to take them much longer. There's the group around the need to transform to re-emerge. And, we'll have, travel and leisure will respond eventually as part of that. Insurance, there's also changes in certain of the mixings of insurance products that will come forward. And then there's also professional services as part of that. Then probably the most difficult one is the hard reset ones. And we've, I think many people have spoken about, what is the impact and what is the solution, and how do you respond as if you're working in the airline industry? How do you respond if you're working in the restaurant and hotel industry? It's very, very tough. And, this is probably going to take the sector that's going to take the longest to respond, and the slowest going to be the slowest to be able to respond effectively, and getting back to the profitability and the revenue levels that was in the past. So just from this diagram, you can clearly see there's a big difference in terms of how opportunities and costs and revenue is going to change across different sectors. Okay, so just focusing on, one of the things I want to give some insights on is around, the different measures that we see that organizations do take to optimize their costs. And we can group these measures into two categories, basically the short-term measures and then the medium-term measures. And what we can expect as we move out of different lockdown levels and our economy opens up further, that we'll see more organizations starting to focus, to move away from the short-term measures and start to focus on the medium and longer-term measures. Now, in the short-term, measures often relate to directing budgetary spend. That's going to include prioritizing your project spend, delaying certain investments. There's been a big effort, especially in the beginning parts of lockdown, to move spend into directing to essential products and services. And we've had numerous cases also of companies actually creating new product lines as part of that. And then we probably had one of the more extreme measures that we saw in the short term, and that was around companies taking force majeure contract clauses and applying that to their key supplier base. There has also been numerous related measures being taken, from reduced working hours, taking off annual leave for people, limiting the use of contract and temporary staff, the deferment of promotions, and then of course salary freezes. So that is all grouped in some of the short-term measures. Then if we move to the medium-term perspective, there's also a whole host of different measures being taken. We start to talk more about the business transformation angle in cost transformation. Now, I'm a firm believer that product and service rationalization will be extremely important going forward. We will definitely see an increase in organizations streamlining their offering, focus as part of that, focusing their resources on those areas of their offering that generates the most value and profits. However, one of the challenging things in this regard is of course that the business unit, a product or service that did well in the past might be less relevant in the future. So this makes it really tough to make rationalization decisions in such situation. Then also very, very interesting is the role of digital transformation going forward. We're definitely seeing a clear trend, this is not only in South Africa, but actually globally, that companies are fast-tracking their investment into digital transformation. And unfortunately, this is of course being done at the expense of investing in physical infrastructure. And you can just think about how technology is changing the way that we operate. From working virtually, how process automation takes away repetitive activities in organization, and that's going to be fast track, of course, going forward. And then, of course, how analytics help companies to be more flexible in the supply chain or making better decisions faster. Another key point that I do want to highlight is around the customer. Customer centricity will become paramount, and this will involve understanding who your customers are, how their needs have changed over this past few months, and I want to highlight the role of digital transformation in this space, where we do have access to a large amount of data and tools, which companies can use to become more focused on their customers. And as part of this is where the cost angle comes in. How you service your customer and the cost to serve your customer is extremely important. It doesn't always just help us just investing in certain digital tools, but you don't understand the cost that it adds to your business model, and then that could relate ultimately to a decrease in margins. And maybe actually the final point to highlight here, and something that I've seen over this even before the pandemic as a really powerful lever to quickly extract value and cost out of businesses is procurement, embarking on procurement, formal procurement and sourcing initiatives. Okay, so we're going to just do another exercise. So I just want to get a feeling from the audience in terms of what is the measures that your company have used or is using to reduce the cost of doing business. So if you can just state how much you agree with the different statements shown on the screen. Okay, that's. I think I'm going to stop there. That's very, very interesting. I think it's from a rebudgeting exercise perspective. We often use the wording from zero-based costing, and how important that is. I've heard from a number of companies that's really used that type of tool to really challenge themselves in terms of what is essential for our business to spend on, and which part of the business is not that essentials. And that, of course, form all part of the rebudgeting exercise. Then one of the other key aspects around, and this is all the people-related measures. We hear a lot of activity in this regard from levers being used to reduce the cost of people. So I also would like you to just respond similar to as the previous one in terms of the type of measures being used in your organization to reduce the cost of doing business from a people perspective. Okay, great. Thank you for those that responded. I think again it's quite interesting with this result. With obviously a bit positive also that the headcount reduction is not necessarily the main area that people are looking at, and maybe considering other type of levers that will be more beneficial. We know that I think the interesting thing in the South African context around people savings is our reality is that job creation is a problem in South Africa. So it's not as in the Americans developed parts of the world where there's more job opportunities for people. So I think a lot of our corporates also have that extent of social responsibility to ensure that our job challenges gets addressed. Yeah, thank you for that. There's the final one that also came through. Perfect. Okay. Just to carry on, all these different type of measures that we've mentioned earlier. It's what is also very important is that you always need to consider, and it's something I'm very, very passionate about. What is the sustainability and the implications of making a decision in terms of reducing your cost base? And there's always trade-offs that needs to be considered, and that's why these type of decisions are very, very difficult. I just want to create some of the created some scenarios that you can see on this slide. It's very easy to use clauses around early exit of contracts, but then in longer term it puts yourself at the risk of supplier and vendor concentration risk, and that you don't have sufficient options to select in the future. And in the long run, that can actually increase the cost of doing business with your supplier base. And then, another point is around the non-payment of suppliers or payment delays. It gives you a short-term working capital or cash flow injection. But on the negative side, you could have threat of legal actions. And of course, it will impact on any future negotiations that you can have with your supplier base. Project rationalizations or deferral, it will look good in the short run in terms of managing your spend, but in the long term, what is the impact on your momentum in your strategic portfolio, your achieving your strategic goals? you can very quickly get behind your key competitors if you don't still continue with some of your strategic projects. And then, of course, company-wide salary cuts. You obviously create a very demotivated staff morale. I've been talking to a couple of people from clients, and then the one thing that I do have noticed is that people. There's a lot of people that's working extremely hard at this moment in time in the South African corporate landscape. And if you end up with salary cuts and then asking people to put in more, that is a very difficult to, of course, keeping people motivated and having that right level of morale in your teams. Okay, so just to share you some thoughts in terms of why do cost transformation programs typically fail, and I've grouped them into these six factors. Firstly, there's around benefits management. In benefits management, this of course talks about some of your business case elements. Why am I embarking on a cost transformation type journey? Now, I think it's very, very clear as part of that to understand what is your commercial goals that you want to achieve, and that underpins this business case. You need to have a target ultimately as part of this, and then as part of having a target, that's not sufficient. You need to also understand how the different initiatives contribute to you achieving that target. Very, very, very important, and it's something that I've seen that's often very poorly understood. Companies just embark on cost transformation, have a high-level type of goal they set themselves, but don't understand how the different puzzle pieces of cost initiatives stitch together. And then when companies get to the final point in this regard from benefits management, when companies get into the implementation part of cost transformation programs, there's not a really focus on the benefit realization element. You often get cost creeping back into businesses. You do an action here in terms of extracting cost, but then cost comes back in somewhere else in the business. One of the most classic examples is that you reduce the number of people, but then your overtime increases accordingly. Then secondly, it's around your value and value drivers and the root causes. So what we often find is that the value drivers and the operational levers to extract the value that's been identified is really poorly understood. So you end up addressing the wrong root causes. So you could potentially even cause more damage to the organization than what you try to achieve. So going through using quite a structured type of process to understand at a sufficient level what is those root causes causing this bloated cost condition I've got is very important. Now, when you get also to managing a program like this and also implementing, this is to the third point, resourcing. This is often people get thrown these type of programs as a secondary type job and above their normal day job. These are big, difficult projects with difficult stakeholder environments. It's absolutely critical that you resource these programs appropriately, both from a capability perspective, but then also from a capacity perspective. And then, as part of that, another area that it can fail is around cross-functional teams, not putting together the right teams to deliver against this. Some of the most difficult things to change around operating models is around having cross-functional teams together, and getting people to work together as part of that. Then fourthly, it's around treating your cost journey as a program, and not running it as separate initiatives. Putting a program governance around it, around planning, the structure, the ownership, resourcing, and all of those critical elements that constitute program management. And then fifth point is around buy-in and change. These programs often fail that it started off in one part of the business, and then when it try to go cross-functionals. There's not sufficient buy-in from stakeholders, and it just falls flat there. And then, of course, also you have to think about the rest of the organization. So this is where the change management considerations becomes critical. And then, lastly, point number 6 is around innovation. Again, something that I think it's going to become more and more prudent in terms of challenging your cost base, is around innovation and bringing in digital angles as part of this. And innovation, what we mean with here is, are your organization capable of challenging the traditional way of operations? As mentioned in one of my earlier statements, a lot of historical business models is not going to be relevant anymore. So how do I need to change my business model and in a cost-effective manner to make it more applicable to the future? And then as part of that, there's a lack of embracing of digital transformation. People will tend to want to carry on with the way that they did do business, and which will not be as cost-effective as in the future. So these are some of the key points that contributes to cost transformation programs typically failing. And then just my final slide before we open the floor for some questions. Just from our side, in terms of recommendations that we would like to put forward for people when they're considering embarking on a journey like this. Now, from a KPMG perspective, there are there's a number of factors that you should consider. The first point I would like to highlight is that you always need to be factual in your assessment. Let the numbers, the facts and numbers guide your decision making. Understand what your value drivers are and how they contribute to revenues, costs, and profits. I've had many times where I work on cost transformation projects. In the first week of the program, there's lots of opinions being thrown around in terms of where costs are being eroded. And when you go through some of the analytics around it, then it points to a complete different problem actually existing in the business. Very important to understand that factual natures. It also helps significantly with getting buy-in from critical stakeholders. And then secondly, when embarking on such a journey, do use unconstrained thinking to focus on the largest areas of value in your organization. If you use a structured, unbiased approach, you can very easily identify those areas in the business that potentially will generate the highest value. And then, the third point is around scenario analysis. In our environment that we find ourselves, using scenario analysis is a no-brainer. It's very difficult. It's going to be a fluent and a very dynamic environment going forward over the next year and maybe even longer. You need to understand what is the potential scenarios, the commercial opportunities, and the risks, and how you can respond to them in a beneficial manner to yourself. And then the fourth point is something I'm also I believe is absolutely critical. When looking at cost savings or margin improvement opportunities, you have to trade off the potential value with the risk and complexity of implementing these opportunities. A good example of this will be in a lot of the labor-intensive sectors, targeting any people cost reductions with the potential of prolonged strikes or CCMA cases can destroy any value being generated. Now, point 5 is around cost transformations are not easy. The easier part is to identify the opportunity areas. Delivering against them is where the difficult part starts. This is where the people dynamics will come through. And, the point around challenging the traditional ways of doing your operations becomes more difficult. great example is, strategic negotiations. Identifying that you're probably paying 5% above the market value for a specific good or service is easier than going to the negotiation table and trying to reduce the contract value by 5% while you've got a long-standing supplier partner looking at you across the table who wants 5% more. And then lastly, don't underestimate the power of digital disruption in reducing your cost base. Really think in terms of how these type of digital tools can assist you in extracting value of your organization. And maybe just to summarize this, all of these type of cost transformation programs, there's 3 fundamental questions that you try to answer. Now, firstly, it's around efficiency. Could more be done for less? Then it's about effectiveness, doing things more better than we've done in the past. And then lastly, it's around structural change. So this is where you're operating a business model, changes come in. Now, how do I need to fundamentally change the way that I've been operating? So that is all from my side, and I'm going to switch to any questions and answers.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, James. I thought there were some great tips in there for our state-owned enterprises and maybe for Minister Mboweni with tomorrow's emergency budget. If anybody has to do a cost-cutting exercise, I think it's those guys at the moment. And yeah, I mean, I like the fact that you emphasize the need to remain fact-based and to look at the numbers. This is an emotive time for everybody. It's a highly emotive time, and I think it's a very timely reminder, that you need to be guided by the numbers and not necessarily by your emotions and your emotive state at this stage. Okay, so moving along quickly with some questions, as we've still got about 8 minutes left. Maybe the first one, you touched on digital and emerging technologies just in your last slide. Any further thoughts in terms of how emerging technologies and digital tools could assist with this process of cost reduction?
Oh, thanks, Ron. I think that's it is a great question, and something that's quite likely in these type of programs. Three years ago, it wasn't such a prudent question, but the pandemic has also fast-tracked this. Where people in the past would have invested in cloud transformation. Some of the RPA was robotics was something people just more spoke about. But now it's the point where people actually are actively looking in terms of how these type of digital investments can help me to generate either revenue, say for example, if you got your sales team having better access to information to make better decisions in terms of their customer base, on-selling opportunities, those type of things, by giving that the type of access. Your robotics is becoming real, and companies are looking at robotics investments for a return on investment also. Unfortunately, that will often lead also to the people costs being impacted by that. That's of course the negative side to that. And then the whole thing around data and analytics is absolutely critical from a cost management perspective. I've had a few times in my career been involved with developing cost to serve models, where you try to understand customer and product profitability at a granular type level to make the right decision in terms of should I invest or de-invest in certain products or categories or customers. And we do have the opportunity to get to that level of understanding of your customer and your product portfolio, and then of course that will help with making the right decisions. So less effort, more margin.
I like that, and actually it is an interesting trend. I think we can expect more automation going forward. I think a lot of companies have also woken up to the fact that there's risk with humans because we catch viruses and when we get ill, and unfortunately I think that I suppose fortunately from an efficiency perspective, but unfortunately from a job creation perspective, I think that's going to lead to a much higher level of automation going forward. We've got a great question that's come through from Inga Conradi. And she's asking, when looking to boost profitability through increasing revenue or gross profit, what are the potential pitfalls to be aware of in the current environment?
Just to repeat that, Ryan, again.
Yeah. So she's asking, what are the potential pitfalls to be aware of in the current environment when looking to boost your profitability through increased revenue or gross profit? I'm not sure, Inga, if you are on there, if you could maybe give us an indication as to which sector you're in, because I think that may also just assist with respect to potential pitfalls that may be apparent in your sector. And Inga is in a bricks and mortar retail environment.
Okay.
Thanks,
so I think
Inga.
I think with the pitfalls, I would say, especially in the retail environment, is again around my last point with that, with the digital transformations. Actually, understand your cost to serve. What is even if I drive additional revenue in the business, I know all the plans. If I have many great examples of where a company has got fantastic top line growth plans, but I don't understand what is the cost of doing that top line plans and what the cost that's going to creep into the business. So you need to be very clear in terms of how those cost drivers actually map to your revenue drivers, and then you'll be able to manage much better your profitability as part of that. So I think it's absolutely, especially in retail, where you've got a huge amount of KPMG's got this global tool which we call complexity management, which is geared around the retail and the supply chain sector, because the theory around is that your customer environment is so complex and so many permutations, and that it's very difficult to truly understand what generates profits for me. Maybe on the top line it's easy, and then at the GP level, but what actually gives me real business profitability. So getting to the point where that is understood is absolutely critical, and it's definitely worthwhile the investment. I know of a few retailers in the South African environment has invested in this type of capability.
Tiens and Raven, maybe if I can also just add that I think if you could fall in the pitfall that by wanting to increase your revenue, that you discount your pricing too much, which in the long run, although you may attract additional customers in the short term, but in the long run, it may harm your business. And like Tiens just indicated, not necessarily good for your margins, although you may have in the short term an increase in the revenue. So I think one must find that balance between not being overly aggressive on trying to increase your revenue, but also to make sure that your business remains sustainable in the long run, and not just focusing in the short term on revenue enhancements.
That's a great point. Thanks a lot for that, Granville. It was part of a strategic discussion we recently had in the tourism sector, where the initial tendency and goal is almost to slash prices quite substantially to get customers back into those spaces and get them used to coming to hotels and so on again. But the problem is you permanently readjust the pricing, and your customers become accustomed to a much lower price point, which could negatively impact your sustainability in the long run. So I fully agree that is an area you need to be very careful in. And then just a little point from my personal experience, Inga, that a couple of days ago I lived a little wild and vicariously and went to a supermarket, something I haven't done in a long time. And what struck me was how careful they were with all the safety procedures and protocols, checking, screening customers, sanitizing, and so on. But in order to create a bit of an atmosphere, there was also a lady giving away free chocolate. And it just occurred to us, when we got back home, that whilst you go to a supermarket and you accept the risk in purchasing goods, that those goods may be contaminated or you may catch something, you need to be very careful if you're giving things away for free, that you are not exposing your customers to any undue risks. as opposed to that? Because I imagine you could potentially face significant litigation if you inadvertently gave away a free promotional item, but that item was not properly sanitized or exposed your customer to any additional risk. So I do think just the risks around how you keep your customers safe and how you engage with your customers and people visiting your space at this moment are absolutely critical. Another question that's come through, because you mentioned increased reduced globalization, and also the awareness of companies with respect to supply chain risk and so on. Do you expect that supply chains will become increasingly localized as a result of what's happened?
I think from all the research at the moment, I think that it's very difficult to answer that at the moment, because we're in the midst of the pandemic. But there's all the fears out there that there's going to be a significant shift to localization. And even if you look at some of the recent results presentations from some of the retailers, those that's got more control on some of their local supply chain and manufacturing capabilities tends to be in a better place than those that are traditionally very dependent on going abroad to find products and being manufactured. So I think there's going to be a definite shift in that, and that will differ, of course, across different value chains and sectors. But it's, I don't think it's going to just end up being a theoretical discussion. It's something that's going to definitely change. And, it's going to be also, talking more strategically, there's going to be great opportunities in that space, So you might see, companies like what you find in the rest of Africa, often, companies invest in their own value chains. So you might find that companies go, backwards or, or forward in their own value chains and owning more of the value chains to generate value instead of having regional expansion, for example, as a growth driver.
Gentlemen, we've very quickly run out of time. It's been a fantastic discussion. Just one very quick question, because I really like this question, and I thought it would maybe be good to surface it. And it's with respect to the real estate sector. And as you've seen, you also mentioned a lot more people are working from home. Companies are rationalizing their offices and so on, and realizing they don't need all those physical spaces. Your bricks and mortar retailers are moving into an online space. What do you foresee to be the potential impact on the real estate sector? And are there any, it's a difficult one, but any suggestions for those guys?
No, it's a very tough question, but I think it's there's also going to be opportunities in the retail, in a real estate sector. Now, how that's going to unfold is probably going to be, you have to keep a close eye on. I think people will also, there might be situations where what does it mean to have more localized working environment set up? What does it mean for people working from home in terms of property development? We also, a lot of people some of my colleagues are sitting in their living rooms with their laptop on their lap trying to work. That's not sustainable in the long run. But what is the opportunity to almost bring the office environment as close as possible to home? That is, I think from an office commercial point of view, that's going to be something to consider. There's no doubt about the impact on large office buildings. I think across the world, people are saying that, we can work just as effectively from home. So a lot of organization is probably going to stop that. So that's going to be definitely a negative implication. And then I think from a real estate, from a retail sector perspective, I think there's, I try to avoid the shopping malls most of the time. But the few times that my wife has gone to the shopping mall, she says it's like crazy inside. So I think that from a user experience perspective, it's still something that people view in the South African communities. It's a place that they want to gather. It might be risky at this moment in time, but in the long run, you probably will tend to find people will still view it as almost as part of the society of your community and getting people together.
Ryan, I know we have run out of time, but maybe just my perspective as well. I think it's a very good question, but it also forces us to think about our business models. I will put it like this. Banking is important, the banks are not. Groceries are important, grocery stores are not. But thinking about it, I think organizations will have to think about things like, what am I going to do with now the parking space, for example? Is there a different use to that? If it is correct that people will prefer online shopping versus physically going, say, for example, to the grocery store. So I do think it requires a different creativity from businesses to think about how do we manage and use the physical buildings or the space differently, perhaps, and still generate the same value out of those buildings, etc. But I think this environment has forced us actually into rethinking our existing business models and etc. So I think it creates opportunity on the one hand, but also on the other hand, it's going to force businesses that are unable to change or adjust. It's going to have challenges for them. And just to conclude, as another example on that, if you just think about the photography industry, when I grew up, you took the photo, you developed the spool, and suddenly today you actually don't have photo albums because you have all the images digitally. Now, if you haven't adopted as an organization to the new technology, you're simply going to be out of business. So I think it requires us all to be really creative and think differently about our future business models. Yeah.
Thanks, Granville. I think that's a...
And Ryan, maybe to add to Granville's point, I think, something from a scenario that we might find in terms of from a business model perspective is that, shared facilities is something that might become much more, viable, where people will look at, how can I, without still keeping my own IP, how can I be more effective in, how can I sweat my assets, my physical assets, by having shared facilities and optimizing their utilization. I think that's something that we might find, and it can talk to warehousing also, manufacturing, even all of those type of real estate investments.
Good, great point, I think, to end on. That during these times, it's important to not only revisit the business model, but actually to revisit the physical spaces in which we operate and how we use those spaces and those assets going forward. So on that note, gentlemen, we've run way over time, but massive thanks, both Granville and Piers, for your contribution today, for being part of this and for your insights. I'm sure the audience and everybody who watches the video afterwards will take enormous value from this. Massive thanks also to KPMG for your support on the series, and of course to all the attendees and everybody who's joined the call today and stuck around for the session. Thank you very much for being part of this discussion, and we look forward to engaging all of you at the next one.